The Pre-Med Year, session number 227. Hello and welcome to the two-time Academy Award-nominated podcast, The Pre-Med Years, where we believe that collaboration, not competition, is key to your pre-med success. I'm your host, Dr. Ryan Gray, and in this podcast we share with you stories, encouragement, and information that you need to know to help guide you on your path to becoming a physician. What does driving 200 miles an hour in a circle, basically, and medicine have in common? We'll find out in this episode. This week, I had the privilege of interviewing a fourth-year medical student who matched into ophthalmology, who also, in his spare time, races cars on the NASCAR series and elsewhere in Florida. Again, in his spare time, as a medical student. How does he do it? That's what I asked him, and he will dive into that right now. Patrick, welcome to the Pre-Med Years. Thanks for joining me.
Hey, thanks very much for having me on today.
So a question I never thought I would ask here on this podcast. When did you know you wanted to be a NASCAR driver?
Yeah, definitely probably the first time you asked that question on here. But I got interested in racing, ever since I was a little kid. I grew up going to the racetrack. My father and my grandfather raced. So I think I was 6 months old the first time I ever went to a race. Don't quite remember that, but had my hearing protection in. But, just grew up every Saturday night there. I got started in go-karts when I was 13 years old, and I pretty much worked my way up from that point ever since for the last 13 years or so.
So go-karts at 13, that's pretty old to get into racing.
That is old. It's definitely on the older side. I mean, there's guys starting nowadays, guys and girls, when they're 5 or 6 years old in like quarter midgets or go-karts or legends cars. And so I was definitely on the older side of the curve, and I've had to play a little bit of catch up during my racing career. But fortunately, I've been able to continue progressing upwards. So
as a race car driver, many would assume that that's what you would do, and you would go on and lead an awesome life, being this star driving around in circles. But for some reason, you're a medical student. Where did this journey of wanting to be a doctor come from?
Yeah, so that's also a question I get a lot. And actually, when I first started racing, the deal that I kind of made with my parents, or that they made with me, is that I had to get straight A's in school if I wanted to race. And at that time, I think I was just starting like third or fourth grade when they were telling me that, and all I wanted to do in the world was race all the time, 100%. So that was a really big motivating factor for me to do well in school. And so, of course, I studied hard, I worked hard, and started getting, good grades. And at that point, I think I started realizing, wow, I kind of like learning. I like science, I like math. And, school became the primary focus. Racing was always something that I could do for fun, but school was what I knew would secure a good future for myself. So, I went through, elementary, middle, high school, got the A's. I was able to continue to race. And that opened the door for me to do some really cool things. No one in my family before had ever gone to college, and I was the first one to get to do that. And I was really fortunate to get to go to Harvard for undergrad and now University of Miami for med school. And I think it was really during college when I zeroed in on medicine as being what I wanted to spend my life doing as a profession. I was involved in this club called Unite for Sight. Basically went around like Boston and Cambridge and gave free vision screenings to a lot of the underserved communities there. And that was really the first time I was able to participate in like any kind of healthcare interaction, because no one in my family had ever been in medicine before either. So I think all those experiences really opened my eyes to how cool the field of medicine is. And that's what sold me on it. And I know that going far into the future, that's something that I would see myself doing on a daily basis. So the racing is always the passion. It's what I could do for fun. And the medicine is kind of what took over at that point.
So it's interesting. I talk a lot about having a plan B, or actually the opposite of not having a plan B. If you're dedicated and want to be a physician, don't have a plan B and make that your goal. And so for you, it's like racing was your plan A and your plan B was medicine, which for most people, it's like, really? Like, how do you have time for that? That's crazy. I'm interested to know. So not a lot, but I know at least one NASCAR driver whose education is more in engineering because that supports the sport of NASCAR and better understanding how the car works and being able to talk to the rest of the crew and tweaking the car. Why? What was it about not being a race car driver and looking into medicine? Did you realize that, you know what, I want something besides something that's going to support my NASCAR career? Because as an engineer, you could go and have a great life as a backup once racing is done. What was it? Because you even just said that your healthcare exposure didn't really start until college anyway.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
So what really motivated you to look outside of other things that could support a continued career in and around racing?
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that driver. So I mean, that's Ryan Newman, and he's a vehicle and structural engineer. And actually, a lot of the younger drivers coming up nowadays try to major in mechanical engineering, or a lot of them are getting into marketing because the business side of the sport has become so important. It's more important for a driver to have a strong marketing background than engineering nowadays. Mm-hmm. In my case, I actually entered college thinking that I wanted to do engineering, and I started off taking all the prerequisite classes that you needed to do the advanced engineering classes. And it just so happened that all those same prerequisites happened to overlap with the pre-med requisites, like required classes. And since they were kind of geared in the pre-med direction, a lot of the applications were more towards, healthcare and how it could benefit somebody's health, rather than, the application to a car or something like that. And I just remember at the time being really interested in how you can use the same basic science that I was learning, and you could apply it to a car, you could apply it to a person, and to make them healthier. And I think on the outside, even though medicine and racing look like two very different fields, and topic wise they very much are. The way that I approach problems with my race car and the way that I approach diagnosing a patient, I've realized over time is actually really similar. And I think having experience in both areas has made me better in both. So, with a person, you're trying to figure out what's wrong with them. You come up with a differential diagnosis, and then you try to figure out what's going to be able to treat them the best with the least amount of side effects. And with a race car, you're actually still trying to diagnose what your handling problem is, and you're trying to break down the corner and figure out, you're basically trying to localize the symptom, what part of the corner you're having the worst handling problem in, and then what can you do to adjust the suspension or to treat that will have the least amount of side effects for the rest of the corner. And so I don't know if that's just the way my brain's wired or how it all works, but I really feel like the two have played off of each other a lot. And I think, outside of that is really just my interest in doing something for a living that's intellectually challenging and that can help people. And I felt like my calling there was more in the medicine and healthcare direction than engineering, although a lot of the same skills can transfer back and forth.
It's funny. Cars and patients are a lot alike too. You have a car that has an engine noise, and you have a patient who has an upset stomach or some muscle aches, and you schedule that appointment to go to the doctor. And of course, the day you go to the doctor, the day you go to the mechanic, the car's not making a noise, and the patient is no longer hurting. So there's a lot of tie-ins. It's funny you talked about that whole differential diagnosis process. I'm a computer programmer at heart. I don't know if I've ever really talked about that on the show before, but I think I spent more time in medical school writing computer code than studying for medical school. And it's a very similar thought process of, okay, here's the problem, here's what I'm trying to solve, and here are the many different ways I can get to that solution. So it's the same process in many different arenas. It just depends on the medium, right? So the medium for race car driving is springs and shocks and engines and whatever, and for people it's bones and joints and muscles, and so it's awesome.
Exactly.
So I'm still intrigued on this healthcare side. Was there any exposure for you from family members or yourself where you had exposure to a physician or family member had an illness and were exposed to healthcare in some respect, where you were like, you saw the impact that healthcare could have on people?
Yeah. So I guess there's one other way that the racing and medicine have kind of come together in my life, and that was actually when I was much younger. This was back in 2001 when my dad was still racing. He had a really bad accident. It was actually down here in Miami at Hialeah Speedway, and the throttle hung wide open on his car, and he hit the wall at full speed, and it was a really, really bad deal. And they airlifted him out of the racetrack and actually brought him to Jackson Memorial Hospital and Ryder Trauma Center, which is where I'm currently training as a medical student. So a little bit of a twist of irony there. Yeah. But, through that whole process, he was in really bad shape when they got there, and they essentially saved his life. And I was, 11 or 12 at the time. So this was actually just before I got started in racing, which my mom wasn't too thrilled about. But we drove from Fort Lauderdale to Miami every day, which is about an hour long car ride, every day for 2 or 3 months, and watched him slowly, progressively get better, have numerous surgeries, have doctors from all different, specialties and teams coming in to see him. And it wasn't like I went through that experience and at the time said, oh man, this is it. I need to be a doctor. This is the most amazing thing I've ever seen. But I think anytime something significant like that happens that early in your life, it definitely shapes and molds you in some way and stays in the back of your head as you move forward. So when I got really serious about it in college, when I was learning about it in class, when I was applying it with the Unite for Sight stuff, and I think still somewhere in the back of my mind was the experiences I had with my family and with my dad and watching him recover. All of that definitely played a role in shaping the direction that I went.
All right. There's the planting of the seed.
There you go. You found it. Took 3 questions, but you found it.
That's all right. I knew I was going to get there eventually.
Yeah.
So you went to Harvard. So you grew up, it sounds like, in South Florida.
Yeah, in Fort Lauderdale.
What brought you to Harvard for undergrad?
Well, a lot of it was Harvard. I think that attracts a lot of people there. I was fortunate. I had a few options to choose from when it came to college, and one of the great things about Harvard, obviously, is they have a lot of financial support that they're able to give to students who want to go there, and that was in my case something that was really important, is being able to get scholarship to afford going to college. I was looking for a way to branch out and do something different. I grew up in Fort Lauderdale my entire life, from when I was born till 18 years old. My parents never went to college, and I thought that would be the best way to not only learn in a classroom setting, but also learn, on a social level. And I feel like I got that return from my education there. I had 4 roommates from 4 different countries, and I lived with them the entire time that I was there. And I learned just as much from living with those guys, I feel like, as I did, working in the classroom. So it was a really cool experience. It was really cold. I wish that I love Boston as a city. I just wish that they could pick it up and move it somewhere further south for me. But that's just the Florida in me talking. But overall, it was a great experience, and I loved going there.
That's why I no longer live in Boston as well. It's way too cold in the winter.
Way too cold.
So you started driving. You said go-karts when you were 13. Did you continue racing during college?
Yeah, I've pretty much raced all the way through since then. It's gotten obviously progressively more difficult with the more time-consuming school has become. During college, it was mostly over winter break and summer break, and we actually got a fair chunk of time off for both of those. So I'd come home to Florida. I remember my senior spring. You have 1 week for spring break, and everybody went to like Mexico, or they went to Europe for a week or something, and I flew home. I worked on my race car all week. We went racing Saturday night, and I won the race right before the end of college. So that's kind of always been the balance in my life: work really hard in school, go home, work on the race car, go race, and that's continued even through med school. Obviously, like within the last year or so, we've probably only raced 3 or 4 times. Because the schedule's gotten a lot trickier. But anytime I have an opportunity where it's not going to affect my learning or affect what I'm doing with my duties in the hospital, I'm trying to be in a race car.
How do you do that? I would assume that even though you're a medical student and your career, your passion right now is medicine and learning it, deep down inside you're a race car driver. So how do you balance that desire to want to go race with the need for studying and that constant kind of nail in the back of your head going, you need to read, you have the boards coming up, you have to match, you have to do well.
Yeah. It's it's really prioritizing, and everyone says like the same things: time management and in knowing what you have to get done in what particular order. And it's funny you bring up the board exams. That's a huge chunk of your life that you dedicate to studying for those tests. And step 1 and step 2 are so important now as far as being competitive for the match and trying to end up where you want to go. So when it came time to study for those tests, I cleared everything off the table. There's no racing for, these next 2, 3, 4 months. You focus 100% on school, get through the board exam. You have a week off after that. So as soon as the test is over, I could start working on the car the next Monday, and I'll have it ready for the next race. And it's really, that's kind of how I plan out my schedule. Luckily, right now, I'm starting to come to the end of 4th year. I have a little bit more elective time, so I know I'll have weekends off, unlike when you're on the wards and you're working 6 or 7 days a week. So I've kind of planned out the races in advance and really cut out the time to work on my car. Or if we're going to race in some NASCAR races, I try to work with the sponsors to figure out what races on their schedule will match up with my school schedule, and so that the timing really works out. So I have the flexibility to fly up to North Carolina or fly to whatever race it is.
Have there been any systems that you've used or tips or tricks from different websites or processes that you've used for time management?
I wish I could say I had a specific regimen for doing it, but really I keep a nice Google Calendar and manage everything that way. I know there's lots of really cool apps, and my friends have shown me a few of them before, but I haven't really used any of them.
Okay. We've talked on this podcast a lot before, being a somewhat non-traditional applicant for medical school. It sounds like you went straight from high school to college to medical school. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
So you're traditional as far as path-wise, but you're non-traditional as far as your experiences. How much do you think did your racing experience play into your ability to apply to and get into a good school like Miami?
That's a great question. And after thinking a lot about it and having gone through the whole residency match process just now, I can tell you it really goes both ways. Having something unique, whether it's racing or if you're an artist or if you dance, like whatever your unique thing is, it helps you stand out and be unique through that entire process. But it also, raises a lot of questions. And I feel like, having spent the last 3 or 4 months interviewing for residency, the first question that came up was, wow, tell me about your racing. And then the second one is, okay, well, it sounds like you're really passionate about this. Why do you want to be an ophthalmologist? Why do you want to be a doctor? And so you really have to be prepared for both sides of the coin. I think it helps you get your foot in the door, but then you also have to defend it and show that, what you're really passionate about and what you do see yourself doing every day and where your heart really is in medicine. And that's sometimes a tricky thing, because I feel like anybody can be passionate about more than one thing. You don't necessarily have to limit yourself to one thing in life, and if you do, you might be missing out on the other thing that you really enjoy. And I'd say that's probably kind of carried weight through medical school applications and now also in residencies, having to kind of go on both sides of it.
There have been in the news lately several other athletes, and I'm sure I'll get some flack for calling a NASCAR driver an athlete, but that's okay.
No, you won't.
There's a Kansas City Chief football player who's a medical student up in Canada. You have I forget his first name, Roll, who used to play for the Tennessee Titans, who went to Florida State University. My big rival as a University of Florida grad.
Yeah.
He stopped playing football to go to medical school, and now he's a resident, I believe. You have these people that are doing the same thing that you're doing and balancing these two passions. Obviously, with Roll leaving football, but this other medical student that's still playing football. Why not, kind of going back to that question that these residency program directors are asking you of why do you want to be a doctor? Why not make the most of your racing career now and then go back and do a residency later?
Yeah, that's a good question, and I think a lot of it really depends on the sport that you're doing. So obviously, I'm not as familiar with the way football works or basketball, things like that. But racing is tough to break into and to stay there. I think the way I got my opportunities to race in NASCAR, because up until 2 or 3 years ago, I was just racing on a local level in Florida. I actually won like a reality TV. It was like a driver search competition that Peak Motor Oil had, and the grand prize was one race in NASCAR. And so I actually won the contest. 700 people applied. They picked 9 people. There was like a 3-day televised contest. I won that and then got to compete in the one NASCAR race, and I finished 5th. And that one race led to 5 more races, and ended up winning one of those and finishing in the top 10 in all the other ones. And, you think that would be enough to plant the seed to have a career take off from. But with racing and motorsports in general nowadays, it's become so hard. If you don't have a sponsor that will continually back you for full seasons, or at least the majority of the season, a lot of the bigger teams in, for example, now it's called the Monster Energy Cup Series, aren't going to pick you up. So I feel like from my perspective, I've done everything that I could to, blow up, I guess, the racing career as much as possible at this point. I've been able to compete at tracks that I've always wanted to race at since I was a kid. I've taken every opportunity that's come my way as far as if there's a race on the table, I've been able to go and pursue that. So yeah, I've given that part 100%. I don't feel like I've left anything on the table there, and I've still been able to keep up the medical school career at the same time. So in those other guys' cases, if they have, full-time, football deals or NBA deals or something on the table, I think that'd be a really unique or interesting question to ask them. But as far as my situation, every race I've been able to compete in, I've fortunately been able to find a way to do that. So right now, still going full throttle on both.
Nice. I like the pun there.
There you go. Yeah.
What do you think with your background and maintaining obviously great grades and being a great student, but also continuing this passion for racing? How do you think that's going to make you a better physician in the future?
I think that as a doctor, you're going to be busy. It doesn't matter, what specialty you're in or how nice they say the hours are with a certain specialty or things like that. You're always going to push yourself and try to see as many patients as possible. And, there's a much bigger conversation there than I really know the details to have a debate about. But, they say there's decreased reimbursements. And so as a result, doctors are having to see more patients per hour. And that's been a trend that's been happening for a long time. And so I think that being this busy at this point in my life, balancing school and the racing and traveling places and getting to do cool things like this where I hop on a podcast with you and get to discuss all of it. As a physician, you're going to be balancing all of that, seeing patients, doing research, presenting at conferences. So I think that being as busy as I am right now is just going to help prepare me for that in the future.
What was the hardest part about being a medical student so far?
I think the hardest for me was the board exams. Just having the mentality to sit down and study for 10 or 12 hours a day and doing that for several weeks in a row was something that I had never had to push myself, that far beyond to do before. You have finals in college and things like that, and you spend a week studying for it, and you're like, wow, that was a huge chunk of my life I just gave up for that test. And then you sit down to take one of these board exams and you realize you just spent the last month and a half of your life studying. That's a lot of pressure. I can go 200 at Daytona and not sweat it, but you spend a month and a half of your life cramming for a test and you have 6 or 7 hours to make it happen. That's actually pretty daunting. So I'd say that was the toughest part. Third year, of course, is rough as far as, hours and always working in the hospital and being on the wards, but there's a lot more social interaction with that versus, locking yourself in a room and studying. So I didn't mind third year as much.
You mentioned going 200 at Daytona, going on those 30-degree banked turns. What is more anxiety provoking for you, being in the operating room or going 200 miles an hour in a car on a racetrack?
At this point in time, I definitely say being in the operating room. And that's mostly because, at this point in my training, you don't really know what you're doing. You're trying to absorb and learn as much as you can every single second versus the racing. I've been doing that for, over 13 years now. And even though I've only raced at Daytona one time, and, that was obviously the first time I had been there, it was exciting, but it wasn't so much scary. You've had enough seat time behind the wheel. Even though you're going faster at those speeds, everything seems relative, unless you bump into somebody or or you hit something. But, you feel like you've had enough experience to be confident in that case. And I think that's one of the biggest challenges of medical school is you're relatively inexperienced compared to everybody you're around and you're learning from at every stage. And so that's really daunting until you can get that knowledge and that experience under your belt.
You recently matched into ophthalmology. Congratulations for that.
Thank you very much.
What do you see as your future as an ophthalmologist?
So at this point, I've had some great mentors throughout the last 4 years. I've worked with Dr. Lamb and Dr. Grigori, who are both at Bascom. One's neuro-ophtho, the other one's mostly retina. And they've really shown me that you can have an awesome work-life balance and be very involved in multiple areas. So, I mean, they're busy clinically. They do a lot of research. They teach the med students. Obviously, they mentor them. So at this point, I really see myself kind of going into one of those roles in the future and being a part of academics. I think that having that variety of tasks to do every day, nothing is going to get repetitive or be monotonous. You're always, researching a new question that interests you. You always have a new student that you're trying to teach and bring along, whether it's a student or a resident. So I hope to kind of have that role. But beyond that, and I know this is starting to sound really busy, but the last couple of years that I've been racing has been part of the AutoNation Drive Pink campaign. They've been my sponsor, and so the campaign is really to raise breast cancer awareness. We run a special pink paint scheme. It promotes the AutoNation Cure Bowl that happens at the end of every year in Orlando, which is a college football game. All the money from that football game, all the proceeds gets donated to the Breast Cancer Research Foundation. And over the last 2 years, the campaign in total has raised somewhere, I think it's been about $2.2 to $2.3 million, which is huge. And I only play a small role in that. I drive the car and I'm a spokesperson, but it's been awesome to be part of something that big. And I feel like racing gives you the platform and the outreach to get to a lot of people and to deliver important messages like that. So, even though this campaign is about breast cancer, which is also something that's near to my family and to me personally, in the future, I would like to try to find ways to use the racing to promote things that are important in ophthalmology. And I think that preventable blindness is a huge issue, not just in this country, but worldwide. And we're coming up with lots of really much more cost-effective ways of screening for vision problems and getting people hooked up with the care that they need to prevent them from going blind later in life. And it'd be cool to really find a way to continue connecting both of those passions down the road.
That's huge. It actually, how you're describing that, it reminds me a lot of what Tim Tebow's doing, and using the platform of being a professional football player, being now trying to be a professional baseball player. He doesn't really consider himself a baseball player or football player. He considers himself kind of a messenger, and he just is using those platforms to get his message out.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I've on the periphery followed what he's done over the years, and I think it is great when you can use whatever sport you're doing or whatever profession you're in really to promote something that's really important to you. And I've gotten a little bit of experience doing that the last several years, and I'd like to see how that can evolve going into the future.
Well, let's see you spread the message now and talk to the student who's listening to this and struggling to find that balance that you were able to find with being a student and being a driver, and how do you help them as they're trying to figure this out and explain to them that they need to push through it and figure out ways to make it work because it's worth it?
Yeah, it's tricky, and I feel like it's a never-ending process. And even right now, I can't tell you that I've had the most consistent sleep schedule the last few weeks. I'm matched, fourth year's about over, and I'm still trying to knock out projects and get the race car ready for some races we have coming up. And you're never going to find that perfect balance, and it really comes down to you have to make sacrifices, and you need to know what you're willing to give up in a certain area to be able to achieve something more in a different area. And everybody has their own balance that they're comfortable with. I'm not going to go on this weekend getaway with my friends because I got to knock this one thing out, or I'm going to go do this so that I can have fun doing the other activity coming down the road. And it is difficult, and being on almost on the other side of med school now, I can say it's worth it if you stay true to yourself and do what you want to do with your time, that when you look back on it, you're not going to regret anything. So I've been incredibly busy the last 4 years, and the racing has only made it even busier and made school even more difficult, having to balance everything. But if I went back and had to do it again, I wouldn't change any single decision that I made, because at the time I weighed it out. I was like, this is worth it. And I put the time in and I did it. So for anybody out there listening, that's the best advice I can give you.
All right. There you have it. Patrick Staropoli, NASCAR driver, medical student, soon to be ophthalmology resident. It's pretty crazy when you think back to your as you're in your undergrad years, or if you're a medical student, or whoever's listening to this right now, and the commitment that it takes to follow your dreams of becoming a physician, and then kind of on the side being a great race car driver as well. I thought I was an interesting person to interview because of those time management skills and the organizational skills that are needed. And obviously, Patrick didn't have the ultimate answer for you, and I don't think there is an ultimate answer, because what works for one person doesn't necessarily work for the other. But I think the moral of this story is that if you have passions outside of medicine, and I highly encourage you do have passions, and you continue to cultivate those passions outside of medicine as you're going through the pre-med process, the medical school process, through residency even, you need to maintain a life outside of medicine for your sanity. And so again, I think that's another good message to send here. So if you enjoyed this podcast, I would love for you to share it with a friend, a neighbor, a classmate, an advisor, whoever it may be. That is my charge for you today. No monetary fee, just go share it with somebody. If you would like to leave us a rating interview, you can do that at medicalschoolhq.net/iTunes. I want to thank Next Step Test Prep for sponsoring the Pre-Med Years podcast. If you are in the middle or beginning of your MCAT studying and you are having some struggles, if your test scores are plateauing, go call Next Step Test Prep. Go check them out, nextsteptestprep.com. They are known for their one-on-one tutoring service. And I tell a lot of students who I work with, if your test scores are plateauing and you have a month or two left before your MCAT test date, give Next Step a call, because they can work with you one-on-one with one of their awesome tutors to figure out why your scores are plateauing. Most likely, it's an issue with you reading the test and interpreting what's being asked of you and what the answers are. So go invest in them. Check them out, nextsteptestprep.com. They have a course that you can use. They have full-length exams that you can use. They have books that you can use. You can also save some money by using the code MSHQ at checkout. Again, that's MSHQ, nextsteptestprep.com. So I hope you enjoyed this episode. Next week is going to be a great episode with somebody who works on Capitol Hill doing a lot of policy, who recently got accepted into medical school, and sharing her journey on what she learned and what she struggled with along the way. Have a great week. We'll see you next time here at the medical school headquarters and the Pre-Med Years podcast.